we've known each other for so long. We've had so many great conversations over the years, and it's like, how cool if people would be able to be a part of it. And not even to like, um, jump in the conversation and join in the debate or discussion, but just like to listen, you know?
I do think that people like us I'm going to say the inside of softball, right? Because we've been in it long enough and we've experienced a lot of things and we have a lot of really cool connections. But I think people that don't live on the inside maybe have a misunderstanding of what we all talk about.
Yeah.
You know, reality that our softball conversations lead to a lot of other things, and they very rarely are what I hear a lot of my parents and kids focus their time and energy on.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the people that I've interviewed, they're like, wow, that was like, you were like getting to know me. I'm like, yeah.
That's what I do.
Well, I feel like that's more interesting than like, some other questions that just kind of feel obvious, but not sincere or conversation based.
Well, I think our sport is relatively new to this media world, and we like to focus a lot on the obvious, I think. But if you look at
Yeah.
industry more experienced in the world of media,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a lot of people that are pushing the boundaries and investigating different leads and areas. But it's just so, I mean, you guys are obviously the lead on it, but it's just so new in softball. Like,
Yeah.
when we played, nobody was really any of this. We
Mm-hmm.
had ESPN, we had Holly Rowe, and we had those post game interviews and an occasional news reporter. But
Yeah.
there was nothing.
Well, I think now more than ever, because there's just so many people who are retired from playing softball. Um, it's a giant sandbox in essence to be able to kind of go down uh, any road that you feel like curious in exploring, like this.
Um, yeah, I mean, I always find it's fascinating to get a little bit of the perspective of people who have lived it, done it, and looking back now, because I think if you asked all of us, right, including yourself, what would you do differently in your career in terms of a youth athlete? And I think all of us would say probably not a whole lot. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think a lot of parents out there or young softball players think that we're gonna say like, "Oh, I would have practiced more," or I, would have. But at the end of the day, we all played because we loved the game and we had a passion for it, and there was less opportunity right in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that we were playing for the scholarships necessarily, or the social media fame, or the TV time, and
Yeah.
because we didn't know that even existed.
Yeah. Well, I
So
didn't.
right,
Right.
right. Love of the game,
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when you talk to somebody who's played at a high level of any sport, they'll always say like, be a child, live your, like experience a lot of things, play a lot of sports, like love it, like not, hey, go practice more and, go do more research and find the best coaches in your area and sign up with the best travel ball team and play the most showcase. I mean, none of that I think would even be remotely on our list of things we would
No.
prioritize.
Well, it's just a list of to-dos, and then that turns into like, oh, I don't know how to be curious or explore my interests or what I'm drawn to. Because I
And I
also think like I've been thinking about this like in quarantine and reflecting on all my to-dos, and it's like, wow, is my to-do list becoming so big that I'm not allowing like energy to come at energy, or I mean it's whatever word you use in terms of like that creative energy, or the spiritual energy coming back to you because it's so stopped up from all the things that you've built over the last handful of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's me though is to look at like see what you're doing, and like I was just sent a message on Instagram to Jocelyn Forrest because what she's doing I think is phenomenal, and Ronnie Nelson from Cal is a judge down in here. Like, to me, it's really cool now to see where people's energies and the things that they let kind of take its course in their life. Like, where are they
Right.
now? And it may not be softball related, but softball
Mm-hmm.
helped them find that path. And with our kids right now, I'm like, what else drives you? What else are you fascinated by? What else piques your interest? Like,
Yeah, and I feel like that question probably gives them great anxiety because, like, knowing we're just, we're kind of wired to feel like we need to know the answers and we have to have the answers right now. Versus, like, great question. Let me sit with that and get back with you on it because I don't have the answer right now.
I had a couple kids training yesterday, and they're like 10 or 11, and we finished up our training with some like throwing a catch, football and catch, and they ended up hunting for rocks to paint. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought to myself, a lot of coaches would probably be like, focus, like, we're doing a task, you know what? If you want to pick out some rocks to paint, like, who am I to stop your creative juices? Like they were
Mm-hmm.
climbing hills and looking at rocks in a way that I'd never even thought about looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a vision for whatever art they were going to put down. And they're not going to be artists, I don't think. But I was just, who am I to stop that? Like,
Right. Yeah.
line of thought. So, which I think in our game and in our sport, everybody is so, I think, driven to get to a certain place that we don't take time. So, like you said, where would you like this journey to go, or where would you like this path to
Mm-hmm.
come from? Like, we're
Yeah,
just
I was,
so.
I really identify with the rock collecting because I was quite the rock collector when I was a kid. Like, I would bring them in the house and I would clean them. I'd put them on display. Um, I'd love to hear what my parents thought about that. Um, I was, and you know what? I'm not even going to lie about this. Going like into my adult life, when I would go to places like traveling abroad, I would like collect like rocks, shells, just like things that I thought looked cool and reminded me of those places. So it still lives in me. That rock collector's still in here.
Deep down inside, who am I? I don't want to stifle that future Chez rock collector,
Yeah.
life, because you
I was
saw
worried
all.
that you were going to do that to me. I'm just kidding. I know you would never do that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, how has quarantine treated you during this time?
Well, I could speak to it kind of from two different lenses. Like, one being a business owner and owning a gym, and my joke kind of the first few weeks was just really not a good time to be a gym owner
Mm-hmm.
during quarantine. So that was a bit tricky in terms of transitioning our business and trying to figure out how to make a living and not knowing how long this was going to last. So scary. And then on the individual side, a little bit of the opposite, right? Almost kind of a 180 where you get some time back. We just got a puppy, and so we had time to kind of take care of the puppy and do some projects around the house and let some of the creative, juices flowing. So I feel like it was a real opposite balance. On one hand, like, you appreciate this extra time that you've never been given for in life. Like, wow, what can I do with it? And then the other hand of it, as a business owner, you're like, oh my gosh, how am I ever gonna, get our gym back open? Are we gonna lose our clients and kind of all of that? So for I think the first 3 weeks, it was really challenging for me to kind of balance those two worlds. But we were able to switch our training to online. So we filmed, got out the camera and did some editing and filmed about 500 exercise videos.
There you go.
Uh, Actually, so our kids have all been training at home, doing some body weight stuff. So, like, out of restrictions comes creativity, right? How can you get the most out of this? I should say constraints. Like, constraints are sometimes the best ways for us to have innovation. And so we switched, 3/4 of our clients on the online training, and so our business has been able to kind of float itself until we're back open. So that once that got settled out, then I was able to, like, really dive into some things and have some fun Zoom calls with different colleges about training. And the really cool thing from a professional standpoint is a lot of college coaches, and in my world, college pitching coaches, are taking this extra time to be like, what don't I know? And what have I always wanted to learn that I've never had time to learn? And they're getting their staffs together. And I've been on calls with coaches and strength coach and ATCs, like everybody in an environment on a team. And for the first time, like them all a second to sit, breathe, take in information, and collectively have a conversation without, okay, 5 minutes later, I got to leave because I got to go to this next meeting. And then I have kids coming in, and then we have practice starting. And so that was kind of fun, is being an instigator of thought and change a little bit. And these programs have a chance to kind of implement that change because they get this springtime and this summertime to figure out where are we going to, like, implement some of those strategies. So that was pretty fun, getting on some phone calls with a few coaches in their programs.
Mm-hmm.
And
I have one question about that. Was there a common question or misconception during any of those Zoom calls with coaches about?
Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
question was, what do I do with my pitchers right now? And that's where it started. Like, what do I do with my pitchers right now? Like, I don't know if they're throwing, and so we talked through scenarios and looking at the calendar. And then the second most common one was like, how can I get myself and my strength coach and my athletic trainer on the same page? And not that, it wasn't in a negative way. It was just, we're not speaking the same language.
Right.
And I'd like to get on the same page and see how I can better utilize them. So, like, the question was, can you help me that professional working relationship a little bit better so that I can get more use out of it? And honestly, like, the skill coaches, the pitching coaches I spoke to were the first ones to put their hands up and say, like, I don't know what I'm doing with training or exercises or movement. Like, I don't get it. Can you help me? And that helped, I think, the strength coaches be like, oh, okay, like, this is where we're working at. And you and I both know when you go into a college environment, it's a hustle.
Yeah.
There isn't to sit down and, like, get into these stuff. So yeah, it was like hey, I don't know what I'm doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Suggestions. And then, hey, what do you have going forward in the fall? What should we be looking at in terms of assessments and movements, and how should I be speaking to my strength coaches, and what should I be looking for from them to give me, and that kind of stuff.
What was your answer?
It depends. That's our favorite answer, right? Yeah, for on the pitching side, I gave them like two options with your pitchers right now. I'm like, they either shut down and then they ramp it back up, in July and August, or you keep them going and you try to keep them on. I mean, ideally, I would go with this scenario. You keep them on the same schedule they would be throwing right now if they were playing.
Yeah.
So how many innings, how many days a week does that look like? How many pitches, if they had access to somebody be able to catch them? Because for an athlete to keep that routine, right? So they pitch all the way through this week, because this would be World Series week, right? And then the shutdown, let them shut down for 6 weeks or so, and then ramp it back up. So that way the athlete stays on that nice calendar, that routine, and that comfort. But if you couldn't have access to throwing, then you would need to shut them down on March 17th or whenever that was when California shut down. Then, give them 6 weeks and start it up from there. But I think mentally for an athlete, that's tough to just go from competing at like the top of your game, and now I'm just done, and there was no resolve.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really dependent upon what their pitchers had access to. I spoke with Lonnie Alameda at Florida State, and she had a really great idea. Is having her kids replay games on their like iPads. So a game they'd already pitched, put it up in their bullpen, play the game, and every time they threw a pitch in the game, they throw a pitch in the bullpen. And so they recreate that game, like pace that game, intensity as best they can. Like they're living through the video feed of that game and rethinking each pitch, which I thought was like a really awesome idea.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, I watched an old game and just going through some at bats. It's like weird how that you have a physiological reaction to a video of yourself because you like for a moment in time, part of you gets transported to that place you were at. And I imagine that happens with those pitchers who are watching their game video.
Yeah, certainly right. This one and these videos are really fresh. So within maybe a month or two or within a year, like you and I can watch a game and still have those emotional connections and those memories. I mean, you can watch an at bat and be like, oh, I know what I was thinking on that pitch from her
Mm-hmm.
in this now. Like they probably really remember that because that just happened. And so I
Right.
think it was a really unique way to use what we have in 2020, which is technology, and the ability to easily send a game footage to a kid, and have them play. You know, we couldn't do that 20 years. But use the technology today to put them in that mindset that I'm playing a game. All those emotions. I'm not just throwing a bullpen. Because my fear when I was talking to coaches, like you don't want kids going out and athletes going out and just throwing for the sake of throwing. Like, we're just like empty reps in the bullpen. Yeah, I threw 100 pitches, but there was no purpose, intention.
Yeah.
You know, April, May, this is when all the emotion starts to build and all the pressure starts to build. And that is as much of what they're learning how to handle and go through as it is about like what mechanics they're using or this specific, you know, angle of release or whatever. It's like, hey, you know, when the pressure's on or when you want it really bad, you know, can we handle that? So putting them back in that environment and trying to like recreate it to some level, I think is really powerful for some. So that was a really, really unique idea. I'm not going to take credit for it. It was Lonnie's
Yeah.
design.
Great idea. And then what about the question regarding the communication flow between the pitching coach, strength coach, and athletic trainer? What was your answer to how to make that work smoothly?
Yeah, I think the first one was like, hey, what do you do? You know, what does your strength coach do when your kids walk into the weight room? First thing, like, what's their assessment look like, and do you understand what that assessment looks like? Do you understand what your strength coach is looking for? And a lot of times the answer is, well, no, I don't. That's not my world. I stay out of the weight room, or I don't know what they're doing. So go to the
Which
coaches. I say,
sounds
okay,
like
we can.
crazy when it comes out of your mouth, right?
Right? I mean, I have more than one coach is like, I don't go in the weight room because I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how they're
Mm,
doing it. And not that they don't care, they care. It's just like that's not my world. So, you know, they wouldn't want you know, a coach in their a strength coach in their bullpen. That's kind of
right.
how they
Yeah.
more of a respectful thing than a disrespectful. But you know, I tried to get them to understand, like, hey, what's your strength coach or your ATC looking for? And then let's talk about how that connects to pitching and how that can make them a better pitcher. So you know, connecting the dots for them, like maybe they're looking at range of shoulder flexion, arm overhead, and like how's that going to relate to what you're talking about, you know, in your mechanics? And then getting down to like, for even some kids, we pulled up some video and went over it. But okay, when we watch a video of a pitcher or a hitter, as a coach, what do you see? As a strength coach, what do you see? As an athletic trainer on the medical side, what do you see? Okay, let's talk about how probably within all three of those overlap, and you guys are all seeing something very similar, but the language you're using, the words you're using to describe it are very different. Or maybe as a coach, I'm seeing a very jerky like athlete, and I'm saying stay loose, and my ATC is saying, hey, you know what? They're actually like really, really like a loose mover, and that's the way that they find tension. Because in order to have some relaxed whip, I have to have stiffness somewhere. So,
Yeah.
you know, I saw their assessment, and this is kind of how, you know, like, so I think a lot of times the pitching coach is seeing something that's very valuable in terms of correcting it or building on it, but understanding the layers underneath it that maybe are the root cause of it or the reason. And so I think simply just watching video together and being willing to listen and not just say, I don't know that word you're using. I don't understand thoracic. Um, and I think that's where a lot of coaches go to is like, I don't understand when you use, as my wife says, you use dinosaur Jurassic Park. So, so that's where
That's
I come in.
hilarious.
I
Mm.
sit in the world of pitching. I know how the pitchers talk, and then I sit in the world of training, so I know how the trainers talk. And when they say thoracic rotation, we're talking about upper back mobility, like, you know, like kind
Mm.
of. And as soon as you kind of make those connections for them, I think then both sides realize, like, oh, I need to explain myself a little bit more, when I'm speaking, because I think we all are guilty of this. When we're an expert in one area and we talk to somebody that we think is just outside of our area, we
Yeah.
assume know things in the way that we say it, but they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think beings are generally afraid to say, like, whoa, stop, pause, hold up. You just lost me. You lost me at, like, hello.
Yeah. Thoracic.
Right. And I think a lot of coaches don't want to say, strength coach, I have no idea what you're talking about. And strength coaches don't want to dumb it down too much for their pitching coaches because they want to seem like, I want to say, that's a bad way to say it. They want them to see their legitimacy of their work and respect their education and all that. But I think sometimes we got to realize that we got to get down to like the very basic understanding of some things and get on the same page, and then we can kind of elevate from there. So
Yeah, that was like actually one of my questions is with your background in strength and conditioning and all your different certifications, functional movement screening, like a lot of the language that you've developed studying and getting certified in those different areas can really go over the heads of athletes, coaches. What have you done to be able to have a conversation that they understand in terms of like when you're working with an athlete, like here are the areas that we need to focus on and here's why, without them like glazing over in terms of not understanding what you're saying?
Yeah, I have to admit I was really bad at that in the beginning as I was absorbing all this information and just almost like regurgitating like just big words. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
that sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to work with kids. Like I spend most of my time working with high school athletes and middle school athletes. And so trying to take what I'm learning and then even get it to what a 16-year-old can conceptualize and understand was very, like, I think tedious in the beginning, but it helped me kind of learn a different way to speak. Like if we're talking about, hey, I need you to have more thoracic rotation, because in order to have thoracic rotation, like it allows you to get maybe a little bit better shoulder flexion and a little bit better, sequencing and hip separation and, creating a little bit more whip through the torque. Like I could lose everybody there. Or I could say like, hey, if your upper back just moves a little bit more, I could probably increase your arm speed. And here's why, because your arm will go, gravity will help it come down a little bit faster. And then if I let your hips move first and then gravity and your torso rotates, then we can do some really amazing things. So, I've had to learn the hard way through my own conversations with my kids, but I get to practice that almost daily with them so that when I get to college coaches, it's not too overwhelming. And then having some constant conversations with some friends of mine on a regular basis. But it's like kind of seeing what you know, and then like pulling yourself out of it a little bit and going back to the softball coach and saying, okay, 10 years ago, would I understand what the heck this was? Or 5 years ago, how would I explain this to myself? During the process, and then certainly I still like get down rabbit holes and with coaches, and I'm sure I lose them on certain things, but I've gotten a little bit better at that. And then really the best way to kind of connect two worlds is sitting down and watching video, and slowing a video down and saying, okay, what do you see here? Tell me what you see. Okay, now I'm going to get up and show you. It's really funny on Zoom calls when you're trying to like stand up and like move and show people, but I'm going to physically put my body in a position to demonstrate to you what I'm speaking about, or have a coach try a little bit of an exercise and you're like, oh, okay, now I'm kind of on the same page of what you're saying. But yeah, I think that's one of the number one biggest issues in college athletics is this disconnect in language and communication.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And on the same page. And then even in terms of not just like maybe training or movements, but even on goals, like in understanding what you want to get out of an athlete. A college pitching coach may want to improve somebody's rise ball by X number of spin rates or inches or velocity. That may not mean anything to a strength coach. They've never been a softball player or maybe a baseball player. Like, what do you mean improve the rise ball? How am I improving? Does she throw it? Okay. Like in what context do I want it better? Right. Because with strength coaches, like, hey, I need you to get better at your deadlift. They measure that in either speed of bar or weight on the bar. So there's very like absolute measurements that you can measure performance in a gym. It's very easy. It's very objective, right? And when we talk about it in softball, sometimes I think our improvements are more subjective. And that's maybe a little bit of that disconnect to strength coaches is objective world, subjective, not what does a real rise ball look like? What does it not look like? I think that's probably the first foundation problem is pitching coaches, skill coaches, hitting coaches kind of see where they want to go with an athlete, but it may not always be as easy to measure as we think. Granted, we have Blast and Rapsodo now, but
yeah,
it's kind of sometimes more subjective. And then trying to communicate that to your strength coach and saying, like, this is her goal. I need her to get better at a rise ball. And that strength coach is like, okay.
I don't know what that means.
I can get her better at her trap bar deadlift. As I sit in both worlds, like, hey, let's talk about that. Let's be very honest, and maybe it comes down to she can't stay underneath the ball long enough. And we know that on the pitching coach side, we know that we need to do that. And on the strength coach side, well, I can see why now she can't stay on the ball long enough because her back hip has really poor mobility, and she needs that back hip to be able to internally rotate a little bit better. And if I improve that, maybe I can get you to where you want to go. And that's probably been the most cool thing is to see the excitement on the faces of coaches and strength coaches when they now have a purpose.
Yeah.
The coaches are really smart and they've got a toolbox of lots of things and ATCs. And when they understand a little bit better the context, they're like, oh, hey, I've got 4 hip mobility drills that I really want to try with this athlete. I think that might really help. And now they're bought in. And now they're going back to the pitching coach, like, hey, I'm going to do this. Like, let me know if she feels anything different or, if this works. And then all of a sudden the athlete gets pulled into that conversation in a good way. Like, hey, we're targeting your internal rotation with these hip mobility drills because I know you need to get a little bit better rise ball. And I think if you get a little bit better hip movement through it, it'll help you stay on the ball. And now the athlete's like, oh, cool. Like, what I'm doing in practice and what I'm doing in the weight room are all kind of meeting together and trying to help me. So that's been the fun part is seeing excitement on some strength coaches' faces as they realize that they have a lot more tools that they at their disposal than maybe they were initially thinking about.
This is something that I don't know, you may or may not know, but is kind of the functional movement screening becoming more of a standard across the country? Or is that something that either it's not being fought for or they're just kind of doing what was done before?
I definitely think it's standard we look at college athletics, I think it's really standard. But I think where the issue is then what do you do with that information?
Yeah.
That is the most eye-opening thing for myself and my business partner as we've gone around and worked with different programs. And okay, you have this information over here and nobody's using it. Like, functional movement screen in any capacity, whether it's the actual FMS branded one, or it's something that you have come up with within your staff, maybe within your strength staff, or individually as a strength coach, maybe you came up with, and you're collecting this information, but so many of them aren't doing anything with it because of that disconnect between the coach and the strength coach. So, you'll say, hey, no wonder this, I was speaking with a program and there was a little bit of like an oblique issue. And I said, well, did you do a screen? Because I'm pretty sure that athlete probably has really poor thoracic rotation. And I think they had done a screen, but nobody knew what to do with the information or how to program it. And then time-wise with a strength coach has, a team in the fall, a team in the spring, maybe a team in the winter, and they've got all the athletes. And so great, we have the information, but we're still on the same program. And so that was probably a pretty consistent question was, what do I do once I have this information as a strength coach? How can I give this to 100 athletes without, sacrificing the 8 hours of sleep I get a night or my time with my family?
Yeah.
And getting them maybe to see a different way of like sprinkling some things in and giving some individuality within a template, a group template, but shocking the amount of information we're collecting and then not knowing how to implement. And I think for college coaches, for the coaches, that's frustrating when they hear that somebody knew that, but didn't try to implement it, or change it, and not understanding all the barriers to doing that. So I do think it's normalized. I think now what's happening, which is really cool, is you have a lot of these new systems like TPI, which is created on base U, FMS, SFMA, like you have like PRIs, a postural one. You have all these different educational organizing bodies that are all coming out with their own different types of assessments, which is giving more information for individual coaches to create their own assessment. So like assessing is only as important as what you're looking for. So like FMS, for example, is a great one to start with, but it's probably better used for just a general person going into the weight room, knowing where I should start them on certain progressions and where I shouldn't. But it doesn't really address overhead athlete uniqueness. So there was a limitation there. Whereas like maybe an on-base U picks up more on the specificity of a rotational sequencing athlete or an overhead athlete and incorporating those things in. So I think FMS itself, as the branded name, is across almost every college program. But now we have to get deeper into it and start getting a little bit more into the sport specifics of what we're looking at, and how that connects to how we swing or throw. And I think we're starting to get there. I think a lot of programs want to get there, maybe don't know how. And now we have things like On Base U, which give them kind of an avenue to explore that. And you have a lot of strength coaches that I think are very curious on how they can dive a little bit deeper. And in all reality, what would be the best to doing that is softball coaches themselves supporting and sending and allowing their strength coaches maybe time in the summer and, financially supporting those research avenues. Because it benefits their sport, which kind of goes down the context of whole like college athletics and the bureaucracy of things and how, maybe a strength department operates versus how a team operates versus how the administration operates. But
right. Well, even sorry to interrupt you, but there are several schools that kind of involve like the kinesiology department to come in and do research on the current athletes, which can be so valuable. I mean, they're right there. Totally. They are taking you from the beginning of the journey to the end, and it just that data can be captured, and we can use that research to make better informed decisions.
Absolutely. I brought that up I'm glad you said that, because I brought that up with a couple of programs. Like, if you don't have the budget to go out and send your strength coach to On Base U, I know Auburn does a phenomenal job with this, with their kinesiology.
Mm-hmm.
Even a lot of preschools that budgets are really low and they're going to get lower, you have brilliant academic departments on campus. And you have, I like to say free labor, because you have people that want to research things.
Yeah.
You have students, grad students, undergraduate students that might really be passionate about this, and giving them a little bit of involvement in an athletic program on campus, combining their passions with that is super rad.
Yeah.
I think coaches have been afraid to go outside their bubble a little bit, because maybe what I thought I know isn't what I know, or maybe as I learn how much I don't know. But now the whole game, softball, baseball, all sports are moving into more research, more information, more data. So it's kind of like, well, I know you maybe are a little bit fearful of doing that, but you're going to kind of have to, because everybody else around you is. So get creative and get resourceful on where you can pull that. Nate.
Yeah.
Data analytics. We talk about that all the time on the analytics side. Is there's probably a department on campus that has some really smart graduate students that would be willing to look at, pitch analytics data sets, or look at Rapsodo information as it spews into the spreadsheets, and understanding how to clean data and standard deviations and all that stuff, that there's just no chance a softball coach has any time to get into what deviation is.
Could there be a day when we feel like we have a good hold on the screening process and what a softball athlete needs mobility wise, functional movement wise? Is there a point we can get to where, like, a report gets kicked back to the coach and I'm just like thinking of out of the box here, where we can basically set the coach up with a program based on the deficiencies of an athlete? Is that a possibility?
So funny you should say that. I got to be on, well, sorry, that's before we saying that. I'm on the advisory board for On Base U's softball pitching certification development, which is exactly that, like looking at movement and giving reports to coaches. And through that process, I got Team USA connected with On Base U, which is housed under TPI, Titleist Performance Institute, up in Oceanside here. And they brought in the entire Team USA softball team, and a team of us put them through assessments, KVS, like motion capture systems that look at how they hit and swing. And the super cool nerdy part is 4 of the pitchers went on the most advanced motion capture system that we have in the country, that required all these like little leads to be tied in, all these little sensors and everything, but basically measured every joint's rotational speed and the linear speed at which they leave the mound. So how fast do they go forward, and then how fast does each joint rotate, axial rotation, and then when does that happen fastest, and what does that sequence look like? This is information we have never had before, ever in softball. They've been doing it in golf for years, and they started in baseball and did it in hitting, but nobody's ever put these on pitchers before and looked at this. So from all that information, then the folks at On Base U, a guy named Dr. Greg Rose, who is absolutely brilliant, has now created profiles and reports and is sitting down currently in the last week or so with every member of Team USA and going over their motion capture system of their swing or their pitch, their movement screen from how their body moves, and then some of them have some strength testing, and then all of them have some power testing, like how far do they jump, how high do they jump, and then giving them basically feedback and a profile. It's like, here's what you do really well. Here's why I think like your swing is great. Here's where I think you can make some improvements, and here's how. Like, I mean, this is for the best players, arguably, in the world right now, are getting these reports. So I do think we're going that way 100%. It's easier in hitting because there's more data. We have a lot more hitters to look at, so we have a lot more information to compare it to. And just the act of holding a bat and swinging and staying within a space is much easier to motion sensor.
Right.
Softball, baseball pitching a little harder because you're moving forward, or there's a lot more
different wingspans.
Yeah. I mean, you should see this thing. There's like lines on it, and you have to like walk with the person. It's like you're walking a dog when they're throwing. But so yeah,
very cool.
Down that road and collected the information. We don't, on the pitching side, we don't quite know what it all means yet. We're trying to figure it out collectively as a group. I think it's about 30 coaches and Greg, trying to figure out what does all this mean. Like, and we're fortunate to be able to look at like the Kat Ostermans and the Monica Abbotts of the world. What is it they do, and how is it they, like, I always go back to like, how in the world does Kat Osterman do what she does? Like, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like, she might be the greatest pitchers that we'll ever see in our generation and generations to come. The she does in her body movements that allow her to be able to rotate a ball, like, and this is a side tangent, but just so that maybe the people listening to this understand, Kat Osterman has one of the best rise balls we've ever seen, and one of the best drop balls we've ever seen, and one of the best curve balls we've ever seen. Like, we have no, like, we might see a really good rise ball. It's not close to Kat's. We might see a really good drop ball. It's nowhere near Kat's. And we might see a really good curve ball. No, she has all three. Like,
that's absurd.
So my like nerdy curiosity is like, oh my gosh, what is it that she does?
Yeah.
That allows her to do this? And I'm tired of hearing, well, she has big hands. Like, okay.
No, it's more than that.
Right. And so now we have data. Now we have a snapshot to look at and say like, okay, wow, she does this, this, or that. And so trying to put those things together. And then we look at like Monica, like, how does it that Monica throws the ball 72 miles an hour. You know, yes, she's 6'3" or whatever, but we've had a lot of 6'3" pitchers before. What is it that Monica does that allows her to generate, you know? And so we're putting this information together. So I do think we're getting really close on the pitching side to understanding and changing the way that we may coach too. The things that we look at, how do we athletes and what's really important and what kind of matters most. So I think we're really close to it. We're certainly there, I think, on hitting. There's not, and you and I both know, I mean, I'm not a hitting coach, so I'm going to stop it real quick after this, but the baseball swing and softball swing are not different. Like swinging and connecting a ball that's moving, it's not different. So we've had all the research on the baseball side for years now.
Yeah.
And now look at the softball players and kind of connect those dots. So hitting has been there, I think, and is getting there a lot faster because of that. Softball pitching is finally we got some people that have enough resources available to dive into it. And I mean, it was nerd out session that day when we're collecting data. Like,
yeah, I bet you were a kid in a candy store.
So much. It's so hard because you and I both know, like I played at the same time as Kat. I competed against her.
Yeah.
Against her for a national team spot. Spoiler alert, didn't beat her out. And here I am turning around and being like, 20 years later, oh my God, why? Wow. Like I just, I'm geeking out about what she can do and how we can look at it. So it was like a double-edged like weirdness, like information, then like, oh, is there like people I played with?
Yeah. Well, you'll be happy to know Dr. Greg Rose is coming on the show in a couple weeks. So yes. I think by then he'll have gone through all of his evaluations, and I'm completely fascinated and curious about his findings and what he has to kind of say about that whole process and where softball can move going forward.
He's probably one of the smartest people I've ever been around, and then also uniquely passionate about rotational movements and actually genuinely invested in our sport, which is rare, I think, sometimes to find those. Like, how many times are you going to pluck somebody out of the golf world who works with the Phil Mickelsons?
Yeah.
And he was equally as motivated and interested to look at a fast pitch softball player.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's like a really rare, I think, time where finally, like, we're getting some legitimacy in our sport where people are seeing the value of putting some time in. And he's really, so people who are listening, listen to the Greg Rose podcast because it's worth every second of your time.
Awesome. I'd also like to point out that you're kind of a pioneer. And I'm just saying, I know you don't like to hear that, but you are. I mean, in terms of, you got out of college softball because you knew you had to do something different. You weren't sure what that was yet. You followed your curiosity into trying to understand your own injuries and why they happened, and you went down that rabbit hole, and here you are now, and you did something with us, putting together the pitching program, which I think it forced a lot of people to think. And I've gotten emails, and I know people have talked to you. It's like, wow, in the 20 years I've been coaching softball, like I never knew about this and how important it was. And just being able to ask questions about why is this continuing to happen and how can I prevent it? And here's a program that we can put in place that could help pitchers have a longer career with less injury. I mean,
you think back to our conversations, almost probably 10 years ago now, as we're both in the coaching worlds and maybe realizing that wasn't entirely where our passions were and our passions in the sport. I don't think either one of us knew where our passion in the sport was at that point.
Yeah.
We knew somewhere in the sport, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
same thing, somewhere in the sport. But what is the sport? Where is it now that I'm not an athlete anymore? And it was, I mean, I do have to say it's been a hard journey, because it's really easy to fall into the trap of like, I'll just do more lessons, and that puts food on the table, and it pays your rent, and all that, and sometimes you have to be willing to say to athletes like, I don't know right now, I don't know why I can't fix that, but I'm going to try to figure out why. And so there was a fear in the beginning of telling my kids that like, I don't think me coaching you is helping anymore. I need to go a different route and figure something out, because we're seeing you weekly, and not a lot of change is happening. And so there's fear in telling people you don't know, and then there's fear in learning new things, and how do I implement it, and can I implement it. And I think my biggest fear was like jumping into a whole different world. Like I was almost 30 years old as I began this journey, and we were so entrenched in softball from the time we were 8. Like we've been in that world for our whole life. And then like, I mean, you can relate to this too. Like you're now in the production and the media world, and
Yeah.
you didn't grow up in that world. And so you kind of found your way into it, but there's still like a scary factor of like, do I belong here? Because
Yeah.
the world we've been in, we only knew, like, so we never really gone outside of that comfort zone. So for me, like
Mm-hmm.
asking questions of strength coaches, or starting to take some certifications, or look into things, or read manuals, or then start programming, you're like, oh, do I really know what I'm doing? Or
Yeah.
and
Imposter
you've done.
syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what. Yeah, that was my struggle for a long time. Like, I'm a softball player. Like that's what I am. I'm a softball pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
Am I really a strength person? So kind of evolving and looking at yourself from a different lens. And then the hardest thing I think too is like, the more you learn, the more you know you don't know. Like the more you
Yeah.
read, the
Yep.
more you're like, oh, I don't. And that's overwhelming, right? Like one
Mm-hmm.
rabbit hole down 4 different rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like hurts your
Yeah.
brain some.
Yeah. That's when you have to like take a deep breath.
I get like sometimes I get emails from friends who are like, hey, I'm kind of interested in what you're doing. Like, how do I do it? Time. Like,
Yeah, it is time. And you I want to know about how, once you decided to make that change, how difficult was it to get buy-in? And also, how do you balance the training aspect versus the actual pitching portion?
um, yeah. So the buy-in, that's a unique question, and I didn't really anticipate this when I first started, because when you go from playing career to coaching, you have buy-in. Especially if your name is recognizable, or you came from maybe a program that people know, or you have some connection. So I always got buy-in when I was doing coaching. And then in strength world, and this is going to sound kind of, I don't know, like PC, but there's no buy-in when you're a female. Like when you're a female talking about strength, there's no buy-in. Like people don't trust you, because there's not enough of us in this world.
Yeah.
So one of my first like go abouts with it was taking a local travel ball team and trying to do some programming and do some training from them. And there was a lot of pushback from a lot of the dads. Like, what does she know about strength? And it didn't matter what my biography said. It didn't matter where I went to school. It didn't matter all the certifications I took. How could I teach strength? And that's a horrible thing to say, but that is out there in the strength world. There is a struggle to see that women can possibly understand strength.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so few of us. If you go to a college weight room, how many of them are female strength coaches in there?
Maybe one.
Yeah, and they're
Yeah.
usually like only with women's teams for the most part. So that was I've never experienced that in my life up until that point. Like I'd never had doing a pitching lesson. I never had a dad question my knowledge of pitching.
Right.
Um, but immediately I stepped into that world. So I had to figure out how to create buy-in. And for me, it was like, well, I just need to align myself and create my network of people around me that either you realize that I know what I'm doing and that I can help your daughter, or you don't and you go off on your own. But I have people around me that are validating and giving the legitimacy to what I'm teaching and saying and doing. And for me, that was having those conversations with college coaches and sitting down and asking questions and doing some research and building those connections. And then when those coaches come back and say like, oh no, like she's, pretty good, then it's kind of hard for people to ignore. So there's that level. And then there's a buy-in issue with athletes themselves. And that doesn't have to do with like a gender issue. That's just, I don't understand why you're telling me if I want to throw harder that I need to work on my ground force. I don't get that. Like, shouldn't I just practice more? But the easiest way to get buy-in is to really show them something simple they can't do. So you put an athlete in a crawling pattern and have them crawl on their hands and knees, and you put like a cone and a ball on their back. And you say, all right, for you to be able to produce some rotary power, you have to be able to stabilize it first. So as you go into a crawling, you go like opposite arm, opposite leg, you have to rotate an amount, but can you control that rotation? Like, do you know how much your hips are rotating versus how much your torso is rotating? And so it looks simple. You demonstrate to them like, oh, it's pretty easy. And then they do it and the ball falls off within the first step and they're dripping sweat by 10 steps later. And they're like, this is really hard. You're like, yeah. Like, like you did this as a baby, you're on the ground with all fours, points of contact. You should be able to stabilize easier than 2 points of contact on the ground when you're right, So I think that was the kind of aha moment for me is I have to put athletes in situations where they don't do it well. And it's a perceived very simple task. Like, can you stand on one leg and do a hip hinge and touch the ground? You fall over. Well, it's probably not a good sign, or just, can you stand on one leg? There's that.
Yeah, totally.
We want to be perfect at everything physical, right? Like you're a phenomenal athlete. If I put you into an assessment and made you try to do something simple and you couldn't do it, you would be frustrated.
Yes, I would.
Right? So you tap into a little bit of that. And then that competitor in them is like, oh, I'm going to figure this out. And now they're motivated to want to figure it out. And so then you're like, okay, now let's connect the dots. Let's explain to you why that is important. So then you bridge it, right? So crawling, and then maybe you go to a hinge pattern. But now let's talk about your medicine ball throw. Okay, so we've got to be able to throw this 6-pound medicine ball, be able to initiate with our hips and then, our torso. So we've got to be able to figure out how to control that rotation. Okay, now that 6-pound medicine ball, now let's pretend that's a ball in your hand and you're whipping your arm around.
It's like, oh.
Right? We go slow, medium, faster.
Yeah.
And so that's what's really cool training is you don't have to do that all in one session. You just have to get the athlete bought in to start. And then every day you give them a little bit more understanding and a little bit more ahas. And it's pretty cool in our facility when our kids have like moments like, so that's why we're doing this. Like, oh, you wanted my front side to block rotation when I throw. Yes. Like, oh, that's why we're doing that single leg, like reach drill. Yes. That's what, and then they're like, oh my God, that's, and they feel empowered. So
yeah,
I think people think I have to convince you all in day one. Like, I just got back for day 2. So that's fun.
How do you balance? I mean, this is prevalent in all areas of softball, but the discussion between short-term gains and long-term benefits.
Well,
because I feel, what's that?
You touched on it before, like training versus pitching.
Yeah.
With the priority.
Sorry.
I suck. No, is that's what you're referring to in that?
Sort of. Answer the first question first. How do you balance the training and pitching element, and then discussing, because those are kind of like two different questions, kind of.
Yeah, no, totally. The training one and the pitching, that's hard. I really sucked at it in the beginning. Obviously, I was really far down the pitching end, and then I went really far down the training end. And I think I was naive on both ends, right? I thought, well, do all the pitching and the practice and you'll get better. And then I thought, well, just do all the training and then it'll just naturally, organically incorporate into pitching. And then one of the things, Greg Gross will talk about this a lot and picked up from him, like, you still have to have somebody in the middle connecting the worlds, and they still have to be coached. I can do a better hip hinge, but I may not know how to do that in pitching because I wasn't coached into, like, reminded or explain, okay, that exercise, like, let's do that now, like when you're throwing. And so it's I need to be maybe balance it a little bit more and do a little bit more pitching, but use the pitching time to connect the dots to the training time. And then as they have more training experience underneath them, then you can start to swing more in the pitching direction because they have a better foundation to them. They move in the ways that you need them to. So now I can layer more pitching practice on. So transitioning that from, like a 10-year-old through a 14-year-old high school kid might value more in pitching time if they have good training experience, and then the college kid, even more because they can connect the dots. But you can't sit in either world entirely. It won't benefit the athlete. And then it's also case by case. So some athletes are going to do really well with a couple times a week of a lot of instruction and coaching and mechanics and all that. And then some athletes are going to do really poor with that. And they might be more of a once every other week. I had an athlete, she's in college now, but we dropped off pitching towards her like middle of high school, like, maybe once a month or once every couple months she'd do a pitching lesson, but she would train 3 days a week. And right before she left to college, like, she had increased her rise ball by like 4 inches. She had like a 5-inch rise ball by the time she left. And I scratched my head. I'm like, holy crap, like how did that happen? But she had enough of the understanding and the concepts to apply the training to the pitching on her own. So able to do that herself. But I think some other athletes, I can't take that format and say, let's do that, because they need a little bit more guidance into connecting the worlds. Or and this particular athlete was really good at separating the showcasing and the recruiting and all of that. Some athletes are so focused on that side of it, like I have to perform, that they need more constant voice around them, not talking about performance, but talking about like process. Like, well, let's talk about your process of throwing. How does it like develop? What's your sequencing look like and all that? Because every other day of the week, it's about like hitting your spots, throwing hard, getting good movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those ones probably could use a little bit more. But I think the issue is like if we take a kid who's under performance, and now we give him to a coach who's more performance, who takes him into a bullpen is like, let's see how many times out of 10 you can hit this pitch, or, let's constantly measure with Rapsodo or a radar gun or, a rev fire, and we're constantly getting numbers to that athlete. Like that's probably not helpful. Like, whereas a training environment, kids sometimes really drift towards it because the measurables are easy. It's just weight. They know it. And it's like kind of ups and downs. We talk about that in training. Like just because you hit one lift this heavy one day doesn't mean you're going to do it another day, but there's less parameters on them, like less performance measurements on them in training. And it's more about the process. It's more about executing the movement well, doing it with the right form and technique, and feeling it in this muscle versus that muscle over here. They're more inwardly focused internally training wise. And for some of those athletes that it's performance, when they get into a training environment and now I just get to feel my way through things, that's really powerful because they don't live in that world. So I think you have to understand the context too of where, your athletes are living. Right now, there's no performance metrics whatsoever. So
yeah, I know. I think every week I get somebody emailing me about player rankings. I'm like, do you understand?
How am I ranking them? With what data set or information?
And really, you want me to evaluate you on your first weekend playing softball? Yeah, that's
yeah.
I think this will be one of my last questions. Based on your work with Dr. Rose, and you've gone to pitch stock, you've had high level conversations with people who kind of are on the same path. Like let's know more, let's understand, and let's develop a plan. How do you see pitching kind of evolving as more information is being gathered on pitching?
Well, I think first and foremost, we're all going to start to get on somewhat of a same page, or hell, maybe even just the same book right now. Like we
Yeah.
have in softball pitching, like there's a lot of different ways to do it. And if you had the luxury of like being a little human drone and just flying over all the little lessons that are happening across the country and all the different coaches that are teaching, there's like a bazillion different ways that people are teaching how to pitch. Like there's so much variety in it. So I think the first thing that'll evolve is like, let's all start to get on the same page using the same language and understanding like, okay, something as simple as what does open mean? What is closed? Because in softball, open and closed terminology is opposite of open and closed in like a golf swing, for example. And so that's confusing to people, right? So like understanding when we say things like leg drive, what does that mean? So getting a common term going on, and then just a really good understanding of what's really important, because there is style. Like everybody can have their own style. You can swing and it looks very different than, the next person in your lineup, but some of the foundational and really important things that are happening are the same between you guys. There's benchmarks in a swing, but the style component of it can be very different. Like where do you start? High, low, where's your bat angle, like how far is your shot? A lot of different style components. That's why we see different hitters. But when we get to the nuts and bolts of it, like what is really important, is that happening the same? And so I think we're going to be able to take the data and the information and start saying, here's what's really important. Like here's or as Greg Rose will say and talk about, like, here's what we don't want to do. This is for sure what we don't want to have happen, and that's kind of how he develops his process. Is we probably can agree on what shouldn't happen before we agree on what should happen. But we need to start like getting down to the nuts and bolts of it. And these things are really important. And then from there, have your style. Maybe your pitcher's got overhead, or, like obviously people that come from a hitting coach or a pitching coach are going to have similar styles because of the language and that person's influence. But like right now, I don't think we're emphasizing the important factors on it,
Mm-hmm.
Mechanics diatribe on that, but and then getting our kids to understand what's really important. And then when they understand that, okay, let's explore outside of that. You have that foundation. Now let's just have some fun and see where it goes uniquely. So I think softball pitching is probably going to change the most. Because it has the most to change, because it has the least amount of structure of, any of our athletes. I mean, in truth to be told, like baseball has a measuring board, like Major League Baseball, and the money that's involved in it and the contracts that are out will always kind of weed out the crazy, right? Like people want to teach some weird things. Like if you blow a guy's elbow out at 16, you're going to lose, from the top down. So it kind of streamlines it a little. And we're starting to get more money in our sport and, more money crossing hands and a little bit more power and stuff. But because softball never had a Major League Baseball equivalent pro league, we have the NPF, and that's great. But we never had like $1 million of contract signing. It gave freedom to a lot of coaches to kind of just make things up, or, I'm a pitching coach because my daughter pitched, and not that that's not a valid because you could still be a really good pitching coach that way. But just because she did it and I didn't take time to research it or learn some important factors of it, I just started picking up local kids and just saying things to them that I told my daughter. I mean, you and I both know some people are just naturally good. Like, just like, I don't know that, Kat Osterman's dad is brilliant, by the way, but I don't know that he can go teach another kid how to be Kat. Yeah. Like, there's some things we're trying to figure out what makes her good, but I mean, she was just, kind of naturally good. So we have a lot of that. We have a lot of, I know this person or I coach this person. And so therefore I do lessons, and parents maybe don't know how to ask the right questions or what questions to ask. And they sign up and they start coaching kids. And then, kids start pitching at like 8 years old. And naturally there will be growth, because when you're 8 and you're 70 pounds, and then when you're 14 and you're 130 pounds, like you're going to throw the ball harder between 8 and 14. I mean, you just are. Like mass is on your side, right? So you'll continue to get better, just biology, right? And hitters are terrible at 8U. No offense to the 8U, but I mean, hitting is a really hard skill and like hand-eye coordination. So pitchers have a lot of skill early at 8, 10, 12U, because hitters aren't as refined and good. Their hand-eye coordination is still developing. That's a really hard skill. I think it's the hardest skill in sport to do, right? So that the idea that a 9-year-old is going to execute it perfect time is probably silly. So it's always in the pitcher's favor, right? And then the pitcher gets more mass. They get a little bit naturally stronger. And so it kind of gives value to some of these pitching coaches out there that they're good at what they do. And I'm like, well, that was really just biology and competition. You know, so if we start maybe asking, like having a common language, and we start having an idea of what's really important now, and we get that information out, you know, in the community, in the college coaches first, and the travel ball coaches, and then maybe down even to the parents. Now as a parent, I know what questions to ask. I should be asking somebody who's going to work with my kid, where did you get like your coaching experience from, or where do you pull your philosophy from, or, you know, can you tell me some of your mentors or whatever before I sign up to pay your person $50 to $60 a half an hour, you know? So I think that's going to change. I think in a few years' time, parents are going to be more educated on what to ask, and that'll weed out some of those coaches that haven't taken the time to look at things through a different lens and understand the important elements of it. Sorry, that was kind of long-winded, but
no, I loved the last point that you brought up is because there's a lack of, maybe not a lack of, it's not knowing how to ask the questions of the instructors, and like the lack of knowledge and experience in softball is, you know, parents get taken advantage of because we have this system that hasn't built in this kind of, you know, credibility in terms of how they train their athletes and how they develop the pitchers. It's there's some pitching coaches out there that kind of take advantage of that. And I hope that starts to end, because you and I have had this discussion before too. Like I mean, there are great pitchers out there, but there should be more. I'm just saying that there should be the equivalent of great hitters that we see in the sport of softball. There should be an equal amount in the pitching department.
If we look at what baseball has done over 20 years, right? If you look at bullpen pitchers over the 20 years ago, touching the low 90s was impressive, right? If we look at, you know, and maybe 25, 30 years ago, right? Okay, 90, 95, woo, but you look at bullpens today in Major League Baseball, it's 95 to 104, right? And oftentimes it's more 97, 98, 99.
Yeah.
And we have frequency of 100-mile-an-hour arms in Major League Baseball is significantly higher than what it was in the 80s and the 90s and probably even the early 2000s, right? In softball, we've had 70. We had 70 in the 80s with early 90s maybe, Michelle Granger and Michelle Smith. We had that. We've had 70 for a while now. And yes, Ueno from Japan throws 72 and Monica throws 72, but why aren't we throwing 75?
Yeah.
Why push that envelope? We have more athletes pitching than ever before. We have more athletes being coached than ever before. We have access to a lot more information, a lot more training principles. And if we look at the collective majority of pitching, and if we had the ability to look at data from the early 90s and look at data from today, I think the average velocity is down. I think pitching is hard. Like, and from just experience angle, like you face 68 consistently in college.
Mm-hmm.
Like why? And that's always my question, right? You know, like we could talk about like the great pitchers and we could say, well, she was great even though she did this. I'm like, well, maybe she could have been, you know, maybe there's something that might change and she can throw 75. Right? Like, why are we looking at it and saying, well, they were great anyway? Yeah, no, I'm not taking their greatness away, but we have done better. Baseball figured out. Basketball, guys jump higher, they run faster. Football, they hit harder, they throw the ball longer, like they run faster. Like if you look at combine measurements from 20 years ago to today,
Yeah, not even
like watch the
close.
records fall every year, right? Like
Mm,
why is our sport like hitting? It's like we're getting so much better. Like hitting is phenomenal now, but like why is pitching not?
yeah, this is where you
like
come in.
right, yeah. So that's
Pioneer.
always in
Hmm.
the back of my mind. Why can't we be better? Like
Yeah, there you go. Start the movement.
yeah, trying one day at a time.
Cool. So for more people who want to know about you, Symbiotic Training, where should they go?
We have a website, SymTraining, SYMtraining.com. We also have an Instagram. It's sim_training. I have my own website. It's called Sorensen Elite Pitching. And then I have my own Instagram, Sorensen Elite as well. We're actually going, now that quarantine has happened, and we've done a bunch of videos, we are in the process of developing an online program, an online assessment. So for kids that are not within our area, being able to get a program out to them, individual, and then possibly even just a general program like we did for you guys, but then, being able to build on that and package that now that we've had some extra time on our hands. So for those that aren't in Southern California, send us an email. Our email addresses are on our website. Reach out to us on Instagram, send us a message. We would be more than happy to talk about how we can help you. And if you're in the area in Southern California and you can come down to our facility, we do assessments for kids that don't train with us all the time and just give them information and kind of help them lead the way. Even if it's just, hey, I want to know if what I'm doing with my program right now is good. We're more than willing to say that, hey, maybe add this in or look this direction or whatever. But yeah, love to help out anybody we can.
Very cool. Thanks, Dana.